Welcome, welcome, welcome to Decoded. This is a conversation between me, Sara Lomax-Reese, President and CEO of WURD, and Sylvester Mobley, who is the founder and CEO of Coded by Kids, and he is the 2018 winner of the Philadelphia Award. And we're going to get into a whole lot of stuff. We're going to get all up in your world, Sylvester, today. And we are broadcasting live from the Heim Center at the Central Branch of the Free Library at 1901 Vine Street. And we welcome folks to still come down. We got a nice crowd here so far, but there's still some seats available, so come on down and join us. We'll be talking with Sylvester and the audience until about 2 o'clock today. A quick shout out to our partners and our sponsors. We are doing this event in partnership with Philly Tech Week. So there's lots of great stuff happening throughout this week in partnership with Philly Tech Week. And we want to definitely thank the Free Library for hosting us in their new, beautiful space, the Heim Center. And our sponsors, Comcast and Pico. So big thanks to all of our partners and sponsors. Let's give them a nice round of applause. We can't do this stuff without and so we're going to jump in. Sylvester Mobley. So, you are in amazing company. First, let me say congratulations for winning the Philadelphia Award. You are a young brother. I am so proud. Not that I can't take any credit for any of your success, but I'm just as somebody who has watched you and have seen your work, I'm just incredibly proud of you for the acknowledgement of getting the Philadelphia Award. I mean, you are in amazing company. Kenny Gamble, Ruth Hare, Charles Blockson. These are iconic Philadelphians, and here you are, 39 years old, who is getting this amazing award. So let's just start there. What does it mean to you at this point in your life to get this kind of recognition? And what are you going to, because there's a cash award with it. So what are you going to do with the money, and what are you going to do with the prestige that comes with it?
Often people see technology education as a nice to have or not a necessary thing. And if young people aren't being exposed to it, then we're leaving young people behind. And technology education isn't a nice to have. You can look at lists of jobs that are being automated, lists of jobs that are being replaced by technology, and there's jobs that would be surprising. You think about insurance claims reps. You think about customer service. Like a lot of these jobs are being automated. So if our young people don't have these skills, we're going to have a generation of unemployable young people.
So what are you going to do with the prestige that comes along? I mean, because I would imagine, I was at a ceremony where you got the award at Comcast, and it was like, the muckety mucks of Philadelphia,
Right.
the who's who, people who really have power and influence, and you are now being kind of anointed with this award. So what does that mean for you, and how are you going to leverage it to move the needle?
Well, it gives me an opportunity to say things that are painfully true to groups of people who don't often want to hear the painful truth. You were there. One of the things I talked about was the fact that if you look at the programs that we run to address things like poverty, if you look at the programs that we run to address inequities in education, by the metrics that were set for those programs, the programs have been successful, but nothing is getting better. We have a system right now where we're pushing more black males from the middle class into poverty than black males who are being pushed out of poverty into the middle class. So when we have conversations around we're going to address poverty, we're going to solve poverty, how can you solve something when you're creating more poor people than poor people you're helping? But these aren't the conversations that are being had right now. So this gives me an opportunity to have very deliberate, intentional conversations where we can sit and talk honestly about what is working, what's not working, and what really needs to happen to move things in a new direction.
So I want you to dive into the actual work of Coded by Kids, but before we do that, I want to
ask you, obviously we have a mayoral election and a city council election and sheriff and judges. We've got a major election on May 21st. And you're talking about how do we address fundamental problems that are facing the city. If you were able to really influence whoever is elected to make some kind of transformational change in this city, what would it be, and what would you counsel them?
I would start by saying we have to focus on long-term outcomes and not output. Often when I have conversations with educators, with elected officials, with people in government, what they're working to and their measures of success have to do with output, not long-term outcomes. And just as an example, I'll talk to a principal and that principal's measure of success is a graduation rate. That graduation rate doesn't tell you anything about the long-term outcomes or long-term successes or failures of those students. If that's your measure of success, you're still missing, a very critical point or what you should be focused on. And our elected officials do the same thing. I see elected officials getting behind, supporting, directing funding to workforce development programs that when you look at the jobs that the people are going into, when you look at the starting salaries, you're not actually helping those people, you're creating the working poor. So that people have jobs, but there's no opportunity for growth, there's no long-term success there. So my recommendation to anyone who's running for mayor or whoever the next mayor would be is focus on long-term outcomes instead of short-term output.
Yeah, I think one of the things you said at the program last week was when you've talked to funders, they are more interested in funding jobs as opposed to ownership and entrepreneurship. So, talk about the work of Coded by Kids, because it's built into kind of the DNA of your work that you're trying to create creators of technology as opposed to just consumers of technology. Sorry about that.
So one, our mission is to create the next generation of tech leaders. So our mission is not to create employees, it's not to create a workforce, it's to create that next generation of people that are going to lead tech companies. People will say to me, but what's wrong with jobs? My response is always, there's nothing wrong with jobs. The problem is for black and brown kids, there is a very consistent tradition of setting the bar low and setting low expectations. We don't believe that it's our place to set artificially low expectations for our children. Our role is to set the bar as high as possible and then let them work to that. And then they decide where they want to go. It's not up to us to decide. But unfortunately, all too often, the decision is being made for them based on what people are willing to invest in them. So for us as an organization, that then bleeds into everything that we do. We don't run short-term workshop-style programs as our core foundation. We have short-term programs that are meant for exposure, but once a kid moves past exposure, our programs are meant to be multi-year tiered developmental programs. Why? Well, you can't prepare a kid to be that next generation of tech leader if you're running a weekend program. You need programs where you're going in depth with kids. You need programs where you're investing in kids. You need programs where kids are buying into you and you're buying into them. One of our young men who is getting ready to graduate high school has already been accepted to LaSalle. He's been with me since he was in 9th grade. And I was surprised he stayed as long as he did. I didn't think he was going to stick with it.
Well, I want you to talk about that because you likened it to kind of investing what a lot of parents do, especially with boys. They focus on their athletic ability, and so they're in AAU and they're doing all of this developmental stuff for athletics, and we know what the likelihood of one of our kids ending up in the NBA. But you said that you're trying to create Coded by Kids almost like a European soccer academy where you get them young, you immerse them, and you stay with them for a long time. So talk about that a little bit more.
When I designed Coded by Kids, I looked not to traditional education in the United States, but I looked to European youth soccer academies. I did that for two reasons. One, if you look at traditional education in the United States, our schools are designed exactly like factories. In a Toyota manufacturing plant, that car needs 4 tires, 1 steering wheel, 2 airbags. That whoever's managing that plant is being judged by how many cars they pushed out in a specific time period. A school, that student needs 4 credits of English, 4 credits of math, and that principal is being judged by their output, which is graduation rates. I think that is a very ineffective model when you're working with young people.
I'm technologically challenged, but go ahead. Try to turn my stuff off and I'm ringing it. Go ahead.
So I didn't want to design a factory. I wanted to design a model that looked at young people the way that we should. I also wanted a model that took a developmental approach. I got to listen to an executive from one of the Dutch youth soccer academies speak, and he said, if you look at professional football, we have more than $1 billion in value based on the young people that have come through this developmental model. To me, there's no reason we can't do the same thing with technology education. We just have to be willing to make the investment in our young people.
So I just want to reintroduce for our listening audience. We're talking with Sylvester Mobley. He is the founder and CEO of Coded by Kids. This is our event that we're calling DECODED. It's an event that we're doing in partnership with Philly Tech Week. And I'm Sara Lomax-Reese. I'm president and CEO of WURD. And we're going to just keep it moving. We'll go to the audience shortly. So if you have questions for Sylvester, cue them up soon. So, you know, when we think about education and we look at the pretty sorry state of public education in our city and really nationally, when we particularly for black kids, and there was a recent report that came out that was measuring technical education and learning. And there was a report that was done in 2014, and this new one was just done in 2018. And basically, what they found is that black students are performing at like 31 points below white students. Asian students are outperforming white students. But black students are at the absolute bottom, below Hispanic and Native American students when you're talking about technical education So if that is our reality, and we know that our schools are underfunded, like how do we actually put a dent and turn that around? I know that you're doing great work, but you know it's like such a heavy lift.
Well, there's two things. One, I would say we have to be very clear about what the problem is and call the problem out. Someone once asked me, why do you always talk about race when you talk about equity in tech? And my response was, well, look at the numbers. Often we get into very nuanced conversations about diversity, equity, and inclusion, and it's easy to muddy the water. And when you do that, it's easy to then move the focus or shift the focus from what the actual problem is. And, you know, I think just outside of tech, in general, race is essentially the festering sore of our country, which we often don't want to deal with, and even more so in tech. So we have to be very deliberate about, you know, pointing our finger to, hey, this is a problem. If you take the city of Philadelphia as an example, black people are 44% of the city. Only 2.5% of people who work in tech are black. If you contrast that with the fact that,
and I think that only 2.5% of the businesses that are owned by
exactly.
black people are
right.
whatever. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Only 2.5% of the businesses in Philly are owned by black people. Sorry.
So, but if you contrast the fact that when we have conversations about gentrification and things like that, a lot of these things are being driven by the growth in tech. So if tech is what's driving this, but you're shutting out, you know, the largest part of the city, then, you know, how can you create opportunity for people? You know, of course it's 31% because across the board we're being shut out of it. But I think a part of what we have to do to address it is not think in terms of programs. We have to think in terms of systems. You know, often when people talk to me about the work that we do, I'm always saying, hey, you know, we need to be in more schools, we need to be in more schools, we need to be in this place, we need to be in that place. Like, I really don't talk in terms of programs. I talk in terms of we're building a tech education system that has to be embedded within the fabric of a city.
And so how many students are you impacting, and how many schools are you in? Like, give us some numbers.
So in Philadelphia, so we're in Philadelphia, New Jersey, and Delaware. In Philadelphia, we're in 31 schools. We teach between 500 and 550 kids a week.
Okay, beautiful. So I want to get into who you are, and how you kind of, you know, what your path was to getting you here. I know you you grew up in Germantown, correct? Mount Airy?
Yeah.
Okay, Mount Airy. You live in Germantown.
I live in Germantown.
Okay. So, you know, tell me about who Sylvester Mobley was between 10 and 14 years old, and like what or who really shaped you in a fundamental way that kind of put you on the path that you're on today.
I was a terrible child.
Okay, define terrible child.
Absolutely terrible. If you name it, I did it. Everything from getting in fights in school and being suspended to horrible grades. One thing I will say, to my father's credit, my father was big on accountability, and he was big on, you can do whatever you want, but there's consequences for whatever you do, and you're going to be held accountable. He was also a very realistic and practical person, which I also appreciate. My father was certainly not the person that would say, you can do whatever it is you want. If you want to be an astronaut, you can be an astronaut. That wasn't my dad. My dad was the guy who would say, you tell me what it is you want to do, and then tell me what your plan is. And if you can't give me a realistic plan, a solid plan for how you're going to do that thing, I'm going to tell you that's not what you're going to do. When I was 17 and I was graduating high school, my dad sat me down and said, hey, look, college isn't for everybody, and it may not be for you. Judging by your last 4 years of performance in high school, I don't think college is the right thing for you. And I am not going to waste my money to send you to college to do what you just did the last 4 years. But you need to do something. Pick that something. Pick what you're going to do. Let me know what it is and stick with it. 17, I figured, all right, my dad was in the Marines. I'll go in the Marines too. 17-year-olds should not be allowed to make decisions on their own. I got to Paris Island and realized this was not very well thought out. What I will say is, after spending 4 years in the Marine Corps, the person that I was academically, you know, I ended up going to Temple, getting a degree in finance. Who I was as a student after having been in the Marines was night and day compared to who I was before going into the Marines. So, you know, I feel like having someone who was always there to say, look, I'm not going to coddle you. I'm not going to, you know, feed you a whole bunch of BS. I'm going to tell you what it is, and I'm going to tell you what you need to do to move in the direction you want to move in, but it's on you, and I'm going to hold you accountable. That was one of the biggest things that helped me.
So you said you got a degree in finance at Temple.
I did.
Where did the tech come in? How did you find your way and decide that this was your path?
I got into tech by accident. As I was in the Marines, I learned that you could re-enlist but didn't have to re-enlist in the same branch. So I decided I was going to re-enlist in the Pennsylvania Air National Guard. I figured the Air Force could not be any more miserable or challenging than the Marine Corps. The term they usually use when you go from one branch to another is prior service. So because I was prior service in the Marines, I didn't have to go to basic training for the Air Force or anything like that. I just had to pick a job, and I would start doing my reserve 1 week in a month duty. the recruiter took me through different sections. She took me to one section, and I could tell like the guys weren't missing any meals. They weren't spending a whole lot of time outdoors. I had some very key questions like, do they sleep outside a lot? You know, how much time they spend outside? She said, well, those guys don't do stuff like that. I said, I want that job. I had no idea what the job was. So I think this goes to show that 21-year-old decision-making is probably no better than 17-year-old decision-making. I said, I want that job. That's the job I want. And the recruiter said, okay, the job is computer network cryptographic switching systems. Fine. If I don't have to go outside, that works. It ended up being one of the best decisions I could have made because that's how I got into tech. And to the credit of the Air Force has one of the best systems that I've seen to this day for preparing people who don't have technical backgrounds to go into extremely technical careers. So the Air Force gave me the ability where I got to learn everything from hardware to networking to working with fiber optics, and that's where I eventually got into software and learned programming.
Excellent, excellent. So you know, Mother's Day is on Sunday, and you know, as a mother, I want to find out, like, who are the women who have influenced your life and your journey from childhood up to today?
So I would say from childhood, my mother. My mother, for better or for worse, is someone who does things her way. She could say, you know, with absolute honesty, I decide how I want to do things, and that's how I do it. I do it my way, and everyone else needs to adjust for.
Do you have that gene?
For me. I work in a space where you're often, especially, you know, I'm not just the CEO of a nonprofit, and anyone who knows this, the data on diversity and leadership in nonprofits, there's very low diversity in leadership roles in nonprofits, but then I'm in a nonprofit that also functions in tech, so I'm straddling two worlds where there's a lack of diversity in leadership roles. So I'm in a space where, as a black male, the expectation is often that I'm going to do things the way someone else wants me to do it or expects me to do it. So growing up with a woman who taught me, you do it your way. You know, I can remember having a conversation with someone about the fact that usually if you see me, I'm wearing a black t-shirt and jeans. This is my uniform. It makes it really easy to get dressed. And he said to me, you're the only black guy that I know who can go to these meetings in Comcast dressed the way that you're dressed, and no one says anything to you. No one gives you a hard time about it. And, you know, a part of that is I feel like as long as I add value, as long as I'm bringing something to the table, I'm going to do what I want.
So you're doing it your own way, and that was the influence of your mother.
Yeah, well, I mean, even with Coded by Kids, people, the commitment that we're making to black and brown kids is not a commitment that a lot of other entities, institutions, and organizations are making. You know, when I started Coded by Kids, people were saying to me, don't do a multi-year model, run workshops. You're crazy. We're not going to fund you if you do that. We're not going to support you if you do that. I made the decision, this is what was best for our kids, so I'm going to do it my way.
So we are talking with Sylvester Mobley. He's the CEO and founder of Coded by Kids. You're listening to 900 AM, 96.1 FM, wordradio.com. And this is Decoded. This is a conversation that Word Radio is doing in partnership with Philly Tech Week. And Sylvester is also the 2018 winner of the Philadelphia Award, and we are so proud of you and that work that you're doing. So one of the things that you also said is that last week at the Philadelphia Award thing is that we are going down a path of two Philadelphias. And your vision is one Philadelphia. So talk about what those, like what the likelihood is of us unifying to be one healthy, whole, productive Philadelphia when we are the poorest big city. We do have a lot of challenges that we're facing, particularly in the black community.
I mean, I think that if we continue to move down a path where we're not honest collectively as a whole about the roots of the problems, because often we're not honest about the roots of the problems. We talk about the symptoms or the results of the problems, but we don't like to really talk about what's driving the problems. If we're unable to do that, then there is no path to one Philadelphia, because we have to start there. We have to start with being honest about how we got here. And through an honest conversation about how we got here, then we can start to move forward down a path of what do we need to do to fix it. I think just being more deliberate, more intentional about those honest conversations is the first step. If we can do those, then there is a path to that one Philadelphia, but that path has to include economic opportunity for everyone. There has to be equity in economic mobility.
But we know that access to capital is like one of the biggest barriers. So, I know that I preach ownership in the media space, and people look at me like I have two heads, because the same thing, when there's a conversation about diversity, equity, and inclusion, it's all about how do we get more black and brown reporters at the Inquirer or at WHYY. It's not about how do we create more WURDs and Tribunes and other, owned. So to me, ownership is absolutely critical, and I know you spoke to that earlier. But what has your experience been in terms of access to capital to actually fund entrepreneurial ventures in the tech space?
I had to think about it. I can count on one hand the number of black tech founders that I know in the city who have been able to access capital and raise capital. Access to capital is without a doubt a challenge. There's an interesting chicken and egg problem though that's happening with access to capital, specifically in the tech space. The problem is most people, especially in the black community, understand how a traditional business works. Very few people in the black community understand how a tech startup works, even from how a tech startup is structured. So I'll have a conversation with someone and they'll say, I'm starting a tech startup, and I'll ask, okay, how is your company structured? And they'll say, well, I'm an LLC. My response is, well, you're not starting a tech startup. How can you take on investment capital if you have no equity to give to someone? You need to be a corporation so that you have equity. As a tech startup, the only way to maintain the rate of growth that you need as a tech startup is to raise investment capital. So at some point, you're going to have equity that you can give because you're going to have to take on investors. Understanding how to rapidly validate ideas and how to go through iterations. The problem, though, is if we're not getting access to educational opportunities like accelerators and incubators, where we're learning everything from how do we structure our company to how do we validate an idea, then we go in front of an investor. The investor asks us, the investor will ask us a bunch of questions. We can't answer the questions. The investor then says, I'm not going to invest in you. We couldn't answer the questions because we didn't have access to the education opportunities to answer the questions. And so it becomes a cycle. We need to solve both ends of the problem, both access to capital, but also the education that's needed to be able to go and raise the capital so that there are no excuses to not invest.
Absolutely. I've got two more questions, and then we're going to open it to the audience. So what is your grand vision? You're doing great work, but what does this look like 5-10 years from now? What will Sylvester Mobley be doing, and what's your vision for Coded by Kids?
I see the grand vision for Coded by Kids as a farm league for the world's top tech talent. and connect it to access to capital. You know, for me, a part of that long-term vision is us having our own fund where we're able to invest in our kids from a pure, you know, this is the finance person in me, from a pure financial business perspective. If we have a young person that's grown up going through our programs and they have gone off, they've gone to school, they're now 23, 24, they're ready to start their own startup, we've been able to de-risk.
Did you say 23, 24?
23, 24.
To start there? Well, all right. Okay.
23, 24. We've been able to de-risk that investment. Most of the time, investors and VCs are making investment decisions based off of where someone went to school. Did they graduate from Stanford? Did they graduate from Harvard? You know, how is this person presenting? You know, are they saying the right words? There is so much risk in that investment. If I can say, hey, look, we have a childhood's worth of data and information on this young person. We've watched this young person grow up. I know exactly what this young person is capable of, what they're not capable of. Why wouldn't I then want to invest in their business? Because from a business perspective, I feel like I've been able to de-risk that investment.
Excellent. And my last question is, like, how can people support your work?
So one, you can go to our website, go to codedbykids.com. There's a contact form if you want to get more information. If you're interested in seeing us in more locations, if you want to make sure that we have the support that we need, we rely on support from the same companies that you buy things from. We rely on support from the same elected officials that you're voting for. So in every one of those conversations that I know you all have, especially around campaign time, when elected officials are coming out to shake your hand, I would ask them, do you support Coded by Kids? Having that support is critical to the work that we do.
All right. That is Sylvester Mobley, CEO and founder of Coded by Kids. We're going to open it up to questions from the audience. I'm sure I just scratched the surface. So we are broadcasting live from the Heim Center at the Free Library, Central Branch, 1901 Vine Street. We will be here until about 2 o'clock talking with Sylvester Mobley. We're going to go to the phones, no, to the audience. Go ahead.
Peace to everyone. My name is Dean Muhammad. I'm also a Mount Airy baby, so shout out to you for that. The question I had in reference to, you mentioned about the schools that you're in, the kids that you're impacting now. Obviously, there's room for growth. Are you getting pushback from their side, or is it more so a capacity funding issue on your side? And then the other thing was, would you be open to a homeschool model? Because we homeschool, and we're in a network of homeschoolers, and it's a lot of money just to get like Google, all that stuff. And so, would you be open to stuff like that?
So for us, our growth is tied to the funding that we're able to bring in. It's also tied to the support that we get from the school district as well as the individual principals. Because of the work that we do, our programs can't succeed in a school without explicit intentional support from the principal. So we've had, opportunities where someone will say, hey, you should really work with this school, but that principal may not be supportive of the work that we do, so we can't run a program there. There also has to be funding to fund the program there. For homeschool, we haven't done anything intentionally for that. A part of the reason we haven't is because we do have like open enrollment. So we have a location where anyone can enroll. So usually for parents that are either schooling their kids or were not in one of those the programs in one of their schools, we would say register for the open enrollment program.
More questions? So while we're getting to the next question, can you talk about like what are the starting salary? Like what is we talk about STEM as the kind of holy grail in terms of the future of work and how people can get paid well. What are kind of the salary ranges and what are some of the work opportunities? So
I would start that with saying one thing. Tech is a very broad space, and a lot of times people talk about tech and miss it. There's a lot of room in tech. excuse me, what happens often in tech when there's a workforce development program or a program meant to train more people of color to go into tech, they're often pushed into the lowest paying jobs. So a lot of times when you see a diversity or equity or inclusion initiative, the diversity gets concentrated in the lowest paying jobs with the least amount of opportunity for growth. So those are usually the jobs that are on like the user support, help desk, hardware side. We focus specifically on the software, data science, and user experience design side because of that. Because we say that we're not preparing our kids for the lowest end. We're preparing them for the highest end. Starting salaries can range anywhere from $70,000 to $80,000, $90,000 a year, depending on what your specialty is and what you're able to do.
Excellent. Yes.
My name is Cheryl Wright, and I want to first thank WURD for all that they do for our communities, and thank you, Sara Lomax-Reese. I, am technically, logically challenged as well, and I just want to know, maybe I missed it, what is coded? Like, how would you, like, what does a day look like if I sent my child to school, and what would they learn?
So coding is programming, software development. When any website that you see was made by a coder, by a programmer. Applications that you use, we just passed tax season, so anyone that uses one of the online tax providers, that system was made by a coder. And what a day looks like depends on what level they're at within our organization. So we have 3 tiers. At the exposure level, they're just learning to understand what it is. So that same question that you're asking, most of our kids have the same question. People assume that our kids are good with technology because they see them on smartphones and things like that. Our kids are terrible with technology. Our kids are really good at consuming technology, but if you want them to answer a question like that, or if you want them to do something productive, they lack the ability to do that. So that first stage, that first step, is giving them the ability to answer those questions. So they're working on projects. So their first project is they're building their own personal website. What we say is, if you're going to be in this space, you need to be able to build your own website so that you can show other people what you did. And then they move on from there with more complex projects as they move along. Mm-hmm.
Other questions? Yes. Hello.
Hi, Sara
Hi.
and Sylvester. I am so glad you're doing this, okay? Number one, let's start with COBOL. Let's start with DOS. This is all programming. And on the main line, okay, at Apple stores and everywhere, they are teaching these kids how to do this coding. So when I heard this, my children are grown, but I got grandkids. So, all right, I just wanted to come because this is, okay. So, okay. So I'm so glad you're doing this, and I don't really have a question. I'm just so proud that you're doing this, you know, because our kids need this. Because if they can program, we're on these computers. I'm saying the kids are consuming our hell hands devices, but they don't know what's making it work behind the scene. I was IT, so I'm telling you, I know the importance of this. That's it.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Other questions? Yeah, we've got a couple in the back. Yashira is making her way there. Yes, sir.
Not so much a question totally, but a comment, in that I agree with you wholeheartedly, and I promote military. I'm the youngest of our children in our family. The money was gone when I came out of high school, because my sisters who went ahead of me. So I went into the Air Force. I strongly recommend that. Didn't know anything about electronics, spent 4 years there, came out on a Thursday. That Monday, I worked for General Electric. I spent a year there. I didn't like it because I had to join a union. So I went in search, went back to school. And make a long story short, I answered an ad in the paper for x-ray technology, not taking x-rays, but fixing them. When I retired 3 years ago, the last project I did was installation of project manager for a MRI machine, for CAT scanners, ultrasound, nuclear medicine. But I got introduced to the electronic field through the Air Force. Strongly recommend it to young folks, really, as another route.
Thank you. My only caveat on that is watch out who's the president. You know, because we got somebody who's a little bit of a wild card right now. You don't know what he's going to get us into. So I would just take that with a grain of salt, a little bit. Yes. Next question.
Yeah, I have to do questions.
Next question. Well, we'll get to comments after the questions, because yes, if we have time. Yeah.
Mr. Mobley, you spoke about the challenges of the workforce development environment. So as you, I know that sometimes to receive funding to do programming for entrepreneurship, the nomenclature of workforce development excludes starting your own business. So what challenges have you faced kind of getting money from the municipality, the state, and the Fed? Because so much of how funding comes to poor people is through the metrics of getting jobs, as you described.
Thank you for the question, Mr. Smith. The legislation around workforce development and workforce development funding was intentionally written so that the funding can only go to specific things, which are relatively short-term programs that result in metrics that are tied specifically to employment, not quality of employment. So if someone wanted to start their own business, they couldn't tap into those same funding streams. So it does make it more challenging if you're doing something like that, because you then have to either kind of twist what you're doing to fit with what they want to see, or you have to go after other funding streams.
Yeah, and I think that one of the values that you can bring to the conversation is inserting ownership and C-suite and leadership as a part of that conversation, because there is just this assumption that for Black people, it's just about, you know, the lowest common denominator. There's really not anything aspirational and big vision when they think about us. So we have to insert that into all of these conversations. So you're going to be at all these tables, and you got a seat now. You got to, like, you know, really advocate hard for that kind of vision, because they don't see it in us, you know? Okay. Yes, we do. Next question? Yes.
Hi. I went to your Control Plus Shift awards the other day, and congratulations on that.
Thank you.
I was interested, though, when I went to, like, there was like 8 groups, about 6 out of the 8 were from the Academy of Palumbo. And I was just curious why there was such a concentration in one school, and is that sort of illustrative of maybe there's a successful program there that could be spawned elsewhere, or why there would be so many from one school?
So,
Can you describe what 8 plus shift is? Or
control shift. So
control shift.
Control shift is our teenage competitive coding competition. So teenagers spent the entire school year working on web development projects, and then at the control shift competition, that was the final round of judging, where the winning team won $5,000. So a part of it is you have teenagers from our program. So Academy of Palumbo is one of our schools. So we have teenagers from our programs and schools throughout the city that are going through multiple rounds of judging. If a school has a more engaged, supportive teacher that's supporting our work there, and this goes into what I was saying earlier about the principal, then that helps with keeping those students moving forward as they're going through. Correct.
Other questions? Yes? We got one here and one here up front. Yashira.
Yes, so Corporal Nelson, you know what I mean, 0311. Right now I'm at the North Philly Peace Park, and we're doing like a lot with teaching people how to, you know, plant things for themselves and fight for themselves mentally and physically. But like, I just wanted to know, like, do you have any apps like that you would recommend to like any young children on how to code or like any games or like that they could play?
So we
No, go ahead.
we stay away from games and gamifying it. The reason we don't gamify it is when you gamify something that is complex, complicated, not always exciting, the kids get used to it being gamified. So the minute they hit the point where it's no longer gamified, they lose interest. A part of it for us is we want to build their resilience to things that aren't always fun, aren't always engaging, because not everything is going to be fun and engaging. But there are things like Scratch and Treehouse, like they're like online programs that you can use.
Yeah, I was going to ask like a follow-up question to that, which is like, who are the tech startups in, black tech people that are doing amazing things that you're watching? Who are the success models that you're looking at?
So there's two off the top of my head. There's a guy named Bruce Marable.
Oh yeah, I know Bruce.
So Bruce is not just a good friend, but an amazing tech founder who is one of those few black people in the space that's been able to raise capital. He's building a tech company, and he's been able to really find his way through the space. Another one is John Gossier.
No, John too.
Who is one of the few black venture capitalists you'll meet, who has been able to go from being a tech entrepreneur to the investment and VC space.
Great. Next question. Yes. Right. Tracy, yes.
Sylvester, I'm wondering how you're preparing students, not only from a skills standpoint, but then for some of the realities of what you talked about, the need to raise capital as a startup, but also the reality of the lack of diversity and leadership in Silicon Valley right now, and how they might begin to break through some of that.
So a part of having multi-year programs means we're able to build relationships with our kids, and those relationships then transcend just technical skills. And just as one example, one of our young men is in his freshman year at Wharton. So he's majoring in business at Wharton. He's minoring in computer science. He came to me to talk about the fact that he is one of only a handful of young black males at Wharton, and he just wanted to talk about how do I navigate this space. So having those multi-year programs where we're building deeper relationships, where we can have conversations about this is the world you're going into, this is the space you're going into. For me, coming from tech, I'm able to have conversations with our kids about what my experiences were, what it was like for me navigating a space where over and over I was the only person, if not one of two, who looked the way that I did navigating these spaces.
So just a follow-up on that one, like, are you cultivating relationships with like the Amazons and the Googles and the Facebooks now to create this pipeline? Because we know, as Tracy said, there's a huge problem in terms of diversity for those big companies in Silicon Valley.
If so, 1% of Facebook's technologists are black. Last year, 1% were black. The year before that, 1% were black. The year before that, and Facebook's numbers are the same as Google's. Like, it's the same across the board. A part of the reason the numbers aren't changing is because companies don't always see the incentive to change. We work with a lot of companies in the space on, hey, this is how you can do it, but a lot of times it gets complicated where it's not just let's hire a bunch of black people or let's hire a bunch of women. It's okay, how do you hire people and then build a culture that makes people feel, one, included, feel welcomed. You'll hear stories from black people who will say, yeah, the company hired me, but they put me in a role where I had no opportunity for growth. They put me in a role where I couldn't really succeed or move forward. So it's a multifaceted conversation that a lot of companies are willing to have a part of it, but aren't willing to have the whole conversation, And it's interesting, this goes into having intentional conversations where we call it problems. A lot of companies have essentially said, okay, we'll address diversity by targeting women. And then often that translates into, okay, we hired a whole lot of white women. We've solved the problem around diversity, but we haven't done anything around racial equity. And, a lot of times I'm pushing saying we have to be specific. We have to be intentional. We have to be deliberate. Who are we solving problems for, and what problems are we trying to solve and are we trying to address?
I think even in that, when people use the category of people of color, I'm like, well, how many black people, like how does that actually break down? Because, they're, especially in the tech space, we
Right.
know that Asians, can be overrepresented.
They are.
In that space.
And based on data, and usually I use the word underrepresented. So when I'm talking about what our focus is on young people that are underrepresented, because in tech, although Asians are a minority in the country, they're overrepresented in tech. So for us, it's how do we focus on young people that are underrepresented in tech and get them into it.
Another question.
Good afternoon, Mr. Mobley, and congratulations. I'm a seasoned chick. I just retired recently from the post office. And I know many young people that's helping me with my cell phone and computer. They can put it back together. They could do all kinds of things with the cell phone. How do you guide us seasoned people and senior people to guide them into being interested in a field like this?
So that's a good question. I was talking to because really the more you do to guide people, the easier it is for us to get young people in our doors. I was talking to a father one time, and I said to him, your daughter sees you get really excited about the Eagles games. Like, you are all in. I said, how many times has she seen you get that excited about her math homework? The reality is our kids are looking to us, and they're feeding off of not always what we say, but what we do and what we respond to and how we act. We have to, even if we don't want to, we have to make these things seem just as important and just as exciting as everything else that they see in their lives.
Any more questions? Yes? Do we have another question? I think we have time for like one more question.
I experienced the working with as a tech person, but I wasn't able to get a tech job when I interviewed. So I have a 5-year-old granddaughter, and I'm interested in what should I say to my granddaughter at this point. She loves the computer, but I want her to do something like coding. How can I start now in training her thought processes to want to do that?
A part of it is normalizing it. If your granddaughter doesn't see that space as a space for her, then she's never going to want to go into it because she just doesn't even see that as her space. But if in your language, if how you talk about it, if how you describe it, it's just a given. Like, of course you can be a software developer. Of course you can be a CTO of a company. Then for her, it's normal. Like, that's just how she grows up.
You're the grandmother. What would you say?
So I have 2 daughters. I have a 4-year-old and I have a 13-year-old. When we talk, I say things like, when you are running your company, how would you make this decision? So we're talking in terms of, this is what you're going to do. You tell me now, because you're going to do this, what would you do? We don't talk about it in terms of like, maybe you can do it. Of course you can do this.
Yes. I'll repeat it for the audience. Is there a summer program for children?
We run year long.
So, and people can just go to your website, Coded by Kids.
Yeah, they can get
.org?
the information, codedbykids.com. They can
.com.
get the information from the website.
All right. Any other questions? We're done with questions? All right. We have one more question, and then we're done.
Right.
Yes.
My question.
It's on.
Okay, my question to you is: are you connected with any other engineers, black engineers that are out in the field that have work experience that could be of support to you for what you need in terms of technical skill development?
So most of the companies that we work with their developers. I come from tech. Most of the people on our staff come from tech. So we're odd in a nonprofit. Most of us don't come from nonprofits. We come from tech. So we are software developers and things like that. I just did an event with the Black Engineers group from Comcast. So we're always engaging with people who are actually in the space doing the work. And when we're hiring, we're bringing in people who are coming from the space doing the work.
Excellent, excellent. So I'm going to give you the final word, but before I do, today is my middle son's birthday, and he just finished his second year at Penn State as an engineer. He's a mechanical engineering student. So I'm giving a shout out to Elijah Nelson Reese as part of this conversation. So, so we've covered quite a bit of territory this afternoon. What is, is there anything that you haven't been able to speak on that you'd like to share, or, any final thoughts that you want to leave the audience with?
One thing that I try to really hammer home when I'm talking to people and really get through is tech education and the ability to gain these opportunities is a social justice issue. Like, this isn't about just education. It's not just about, hey, maybe kids should do it, maybe they shouldn't, maybe adults should do it, maybe they shouldn't. This is about social justice. I often ask people, when Martin Luther King was in Tennessee organizing sanitation workers, what was it about? Like, it wasn't voting rights. It was about economic equality. This is no different. We're moving to a society where without these skills, you will have very little opportunity. Like, that's a fact. So if we're not looking at this like a social justice issue, we are putting large groups of people in a very, very precarious position.
Well, we want to give Sylvester Mobley, CEO and founder of Coded by Kids, a big round of applause. Thank you very much. I'm sure Sylvester will be around. We've got some beautiful young people in the house. I want to thank the parents, the grandparents, the caregivers for bringing them out to hear this conversation with Sylvester Mobley. And again, I want to thank the Free Library for hosting us, our sponsors, Comcast, Pico, and our partnership with Philly Tech Week. So check out his website, codedbykids.com, and learn as much as you can about his work and how we can support this young brother. So thank you all for coming.
Thank you.